We want to talk now about Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. This, in Leviticus 23, is shown as a Sabbath of Sabbaths. In Hebrew, a Shabbat Shabbaton. The Day of Atonement was the one day in the year that the high priest, the holiest day when the holiest man could go into the holiest place, the Holy of Holies, and offer atonement for the people on the mercy seat, on the Kippurit. And this is an incredible day of national redemption and deliverance for the people of Israel. And so what is a very solemn day becomes a day of great relief and rejoicing, even as the sin of the people is thoroughly addressed and dealt with. For example, the sins are confessed on two goats, right? And one of them is the scapegoat. And the scapegoat is then led off into the wilderness, thrown off to a place called Azazel, where is an exact representation of what punishment we all deserve. And that Yeshua, if you look in the book of Hebrews, he talks a lot about the Day of Atonement, okay? And that this was something we all deserved, and that the punishment that brought us peace was put on him. And so Yom Kippur is a day of celebrating our atonement that we have, but it is also a day that has a future and prophetic significance for national atonement for the people of Israel, and just as a day of judgment for the Lord. So as you look at the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, what do you see as far as the fulfillment that is ahead of us on this day?
Well, the first thing when I think of Yom Kippur is the fact that on that day, the high priest, he would take off his glory garments. And as it says in Leviticus 16, he would put on just the plain white, simple garments that looked like all the other priests. And all the other priests basically were put out of the temple so that the high priest alone would carry out all the various things that needed to be done that day. And the first thing that I think of with Yom Kippur is how Yeshua came and put aside his glory and came to kin himself as he became incarnated. The incarnation is him taking on a human flesh and then bringing that body to the cross to then become our sacrifice,
our atonement.
Yeah. And how good it is, because he didn't cover the sins, he removes the sins. Because the animals and all the sacrifices that were done prior to were all types and symbols of what Yeshua would do, the Messiah would do when he came. And he does not cover sin. He takes it away. As far as the east is from the west. And how when he went into the Holy of Holies, he went in that plain white garment. Now, you've probably heard the Christian tradition that a rope was around his legs, and if they didn't hear the tingling of the bells on the hem of the high priest's garment, that then they could pull him out by the rope. Well, that is just tradition. That absolutely is wrong. Leviticus 16 clearly says that he only went in the plain white linen garment. In fact, that day he had his glory garments on, would do certain things, he would take them off, and long story short, over 5 times he would change his garments and immerse. But only go into the Holy of Holies in this plain white linen garment, looking like every other priest. And that speaks of the simplicity, the humility of our Messiah, our King, who came in humility, in flesh, to be our Passover lamb, but also teach about Yom Kippur, what he would do. And so that to me is the most amazing thing.
Oh, it's such a thorough shadow.
Yes,
right,
perfect.
Of what Yeshua would be and what he would do as our high priest in the order of Melchizedek.
Yes.
Incredible. Entering into the throne room of his Father in heaven.
Oh, yes.
And dealing with our sin once for all.
Yes.
Right? Even as the Day of Atonement was this yearly cycle, the writer of Hebrews is like, no, this is a thorough once for all atonement that has been provided to us. And so the Day of Atonement is an opportunity for us as believers in his atoning work to celebrate and rejoice in that, to rest in that. And it is a day of rest. You don't do stuff on Yom Kippur, right? This is a day of total, complete rest, right? And but it also speaks of something coming. And so maybe talk to us about that, Sue, a little bit, that thing that's coming that we can anticipate as well on Yom Kippur.
Well, I think this has to do with when the Lord actually, with the blowing of the final shofar, which is called the Shofar Hagadol, at the end of the closing of Yom Kippur. That's when the Lord, we believe, is going to return to earth with his saints who have who have been or are with them, and coming to establish his kingdom here on earth. And so it's a time that I believe to be we need to be very serious about perhaps the intercession and helping prepare others so that they can rest in the finished work of Yeshua as well. So when the Lord returns, it'll be an exciting time for them because they will have already been written into the Lamb's Book of Life. And so for that part is to me very, very important to understand how all these feasts have to do with the Lord's return. And the fact that season is probably very close, in terms of our future, because of look at what's happening in the whole world today with what's happening in Israel. So many things are fulfilled right now that have never been fulfilled before in the last 2,000 years.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's exciting to live with this anticipation. But it's a great time to intercede for your family, for your loved ones, for the nations, for a time that we know that the nation of Israel will look upon the one that they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one who mourns for their only son, because the first time, even as Joseph was rejected by his brothers and sent off to Egypt, and they didn't recognize him the first time they saw him because he looked very Gentile. So a lot of the Jewish people today in Israel cannot identify with Yeshua because they see him as the Gentile Messiah, not theirs. And so what's exciting is when we start incorporating these biblical feasts that have been lost and now are being restored to the church universally by the Lord, they're going to be able to see the connection and the recognition and how amazing and joyful and life from the dead are we going to see when the entire nation of Israel realizes who their Messiah was. And what a great time of reconciliation, just like Joseph was with his brothers. It wasn't a time of anything other than great joy when their eyes were opened and the second time that they saw Joseph, and they recognized who he was when he revealed himself to them. And that's the season that we're soon upon.
Yeah, it reminds me when you talk about the believers, the Gentile believers, and that's my phone, don't worry about that. Yeah. The Gentile believers that are beginning to behave more like the Jewish people. It reminds me of Paul's words that to the Jew, I became like a Jew that I might win the Jew. In other words, winning the Jew is involved with looking in this sort of hiddenness of Joseph, because he looked very Egyptian, right? And how this disclosure that God will use, this provoking to jealousy, right? This is a season of provoking to jealousy because we know that the sort of sequence of events is going to be the time of the Gentiles, right? The fullness of the Gentiles. And then then all of Israel will be saved, right? And so we've seen this even in our lifetime. There are very, very few spots left in the world where the gospel has not been proclaimed, right? So as far as to the ends of the earth, it's almost like you could check that box, right? And that's I think, is the question in our heart is, how close are we to checking that box? But it's close. It's certainly sooner than we first believed, right? And it's so much closer than they were 2,000 years ago, where they were nowhere near checking that box, right? And so we live in a generation, the first generation, that is really in a stone's throw from checking that box.
That's right.
And the fullness of the Gentiles coming in. We also know that there's a patience that God has, not desiring that any should perish, right? But I think it's important what you said too, is I believe this is the fulfillment of this, or I believe that this is connected to that. That as we look at the fall feasts and these potential fulfillments, there's biblically it seems some things seem more obvious and more compelling. Some things are a little bit more mysterious about them, right? Clearly, they are hugely significant. That is, without any dispute, hugely significant and are ready to be fulfilled. And so Yom Kippur, we want to invite you to celebrate the Day of Atonement, this wonderful day of remembering our atonement and praying for and interceding for the atonement of the world and especially the children of Israel. On October the 12th, we're going to be meeting at the Malat's house at 6 p.m. We're going to be breaking fast together and praying together. And all the details for that are also right here on the website. And we would love to see you and celebrate this atonement, this incredible redemption. I love how you said it was atonement wasn't just a covering over, but it was a removing of our sin and what he did so thoroughly on the cross.